I'm sure if we found that we were misled or things went wrong in the future, we could kick up one hell of a fuss. And politics being what it is, I still believe that if there was something seriously wrong with devolution, we would argue fully and long. But that's the purpose of that, and my colleague Councillor Price will focus on that in his contribution, because housing is central to this deal, because affordable housing for this city at a time of a housing crisis is central for all councillors. And there are two parts to that housing deal, but one of them is particularly important to us. So those are the decisions, and being a Democrat, and even though I'm now faced with the first opportunity I've ever seen on a council agenda for me to make a decision, I will be guided by the council's decision on this matter tonight. So all I would say is, in terms of the wording that spills onto page 2, that I would just presume that we will carry over the wording as agreed by the council. The last 4 months have been very demanding, and not altogether rewarding at times, but I believe that they're rewarding in the end, so the effort has been worthwhile. The geography previously was wrong, not because we aren't party to East Anglia and we share a lot of interests, but within 23 local authorities we wouldn't have a chance of representing Cambridge. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to actually explain the particular needs of the wider geography. And whilst this is a creature of local government structures that go back hundreds of years probably, those 7 councils, the county, Peterborough, Huntingdonshire, East Cambridgeshire, Fenland, South Cambridgeshire, they've all got something in common with the city. And we have worked with them successfully, despite the fact we might be different political colours and despite the different interests in the city, we've worked with them successfully. As Councillor Blanco has said, the old county structure plan and a number of other ways that we do business have worked that way. And it's effectively also recreating the old county geography that Councillor Adey sat on when the county council was a bigger place. So there is a geography that has been answered in the changes that makes a lot of sense to us. In terms of the issue of governance, the government has said that a mayor is a condition of this deal. We will discuss this issue with any incoming ministers, the incoming administration, but that has to be weighed up into the balance of whether or not we regard this as a deal that we recommend to the people of Cambridge. Clearly, as I said in answer to a public question, it's certainly my belief, Mr. Mayor, that and using your term, Mayor, that there has to be some distinction. And in a way, if you look at the roles of this individual, they're particularly leading on growth and transport. And it could well be that there's some discussion about what their title is if this proposal goes ahead. The combined authority, we will be 1 vote out of 9. We'll have an opportunity to veto any increase in the number if we don't regard that as good. But Cambridge has been a voice which has been quite able to put its position across in this county over the years. And I don't think we've had a bad deal out of it. So it is a case of accountability. There are issues of scrutiny, and we were considering some of the issues that are referred to in the amendment that Councillor Bick is bringing forward. There has to be clear accountability of whoever's the representative, and there has to be public scrutiny, and I got some wording put in on the deal on that. If there are any joint arrangements with Norfolk and Suffolk, then those similarly need to be scrutinised. I did originate the term brother and sister deal, and if there are brother and sister arrangements, they have to be accountable. Overall, having had 36 years involvement in local government in and out over time, I believe that there is genuine devolution in this deal. I wouldn't support this. Councillor Adey is surprised. I wouldn't support this if I didn't believe that there are threads of genuine devolution. It may be that a future government may want to just try and shift down responsibility without the money. There may be the risk that in the future there's a different pressure. But this is the deal. This isn't a flexible deal. It is what's on these 30 or 40 pieces of paper. And people may have suspicions about that. But I believe, having looked at the issues that are raised about jobs, about employment, about skills, about rail, about roads, about a number of these issues, that on balance, and this is a question of balance, and that it's a good deal. But it's the housing that my colleague will talk about in particular. Because in March we weren't listened to, there wasn't even mention of affordable housing in the document in March, not a mention. In May, we got £100 million offer, but that was for housing associations. And given the fact that there's not a lot of developable land for housing associations, it was also geographically one that in the context of Cambridge City was not necessarily going to deliver much housing. So housing is a big part of this deal. And it's central, I think, to the reason why we have been listened to. And partly we've been listened to because we said no, and then we said no. And then finally, this offer came through. And whilst there will be people in this chamber who will say, we think we could have done better, I have not seen an offer as good as this since the 1970s. So in 40 years, nearly, of local government involvement, you go back and see when this council has been offered a funding deal of this sort, of this kind, and of course, a couple of those years were under a Labour government, but a lot of them were under Conservative government. So apart from the great efforts of John Healey near the end of the Labour government, and Tony Blair had to admit it on television when he was being cross-examined yesterday, we've had poor governments on social housing for nearly 40 years. And I'm not saying that this government loves what they're offering to us. It is contradictory to the direction that they've taken policy in. Anyway, so housing is a key issue, but my point is that this hasn't been offered to this council in my lifetime as a councillor and my lifetime working in local government. So we're proposing this, Mr. Mayor, and it's going to go out to consultation, and we will listen to the responses that people give us. We'll also talk to our colleagues in the other councils, and we will work with them, because essentially if the councils don't work well together, they will not succeed. And I believe that overall I can recommend this deal to the council. So the affirmative in relation to the recommendations, but I will listen to the other councils' contributions before I reach my conclusion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was waiting on tenterhooks for the last lines of Councillor Herbert's speech, when he actually for the first time said that he recommends this to us. Because so far it's been sitting here and defended and explained by officers only, and I believe that his recommendation is important to the council because he took part in these negotiations. On our side, we have some major reservations about this deal. We regard what is an unwanted extra tier of government, an elected mayor subject to minimal accountability from broad representative public opinion, and an administrative force fit onto an area that doesn't share a common economic base. All this is a very high price to pay for what has been achieved in terms of housing. And on housing, we would congratulate Councillor Herbert on the housing elements of this deal. I have followed the course on the outside of the negotiations as he has described them, and in terms of efforts put in, there is a result on housing, and we acknowledge it. No one can deny that those are positive steps, and that they are addressed at what we would all agree is a massive need in the area. But we have two issues with those. The first is that the negotiation did not succeed in squaring off the rest of the government's appalling policy on housing. So, without a suspension of right to buy, which my colleagues believe should be a real devolved local power to suspend something like the right to buy, and with only a discussion committed for some time in the future about the impact of forced sales of high-value council homes, assessing the positive contribution of this deal is like trying to fill up a bucket of water with a hole in it. We don't know how big the hole will be, and we don't know, to adopt a position of extreme scepticism, whether the apparent new money can simply be recouped by the application of the government's other policies through forced sales and the redirection of homes and communities agencies' monies to other places. So that is a major area of scepticism for us about what we read. Secondly, that even on a more optimistic interpretation of the future, these measures do not come close to meeting the size of the area's housing needs. Just to offer a point of reference, when we were leading the council, the 30-year business plan for the HRA was able to set an ambition for the building of as many as 2,000 extra new homes. We know it's not the fault, we know it's the fault of the government and not the new administration that looks currently impossible. But it does rather set the bar against which this deal, in respect of housing, should be judged. It's certainly something, but it's nowhere near enough. So, what about the costs of this deal? The deal, which masquerades under the title devolution, and here I would disagree substantially from what Councillor Herbert has said, masquerading under the title of devolution, in fact contains, to our minds, very little devolution from central government. It would be much easier for us to welcome it if it did. What it is a series of disconnected promises of different kinds to patch together enough support for a particular local structure which makes local councils a bit less challenging to the centre, and if at all possible, parcelled up in politically friendly clusters. This is what the Americans call pork barrel politics, handing out goodies to gain support for something else entirely. And it's a sordid affair. It is in America and it is if it's coming here. But whatever you think about it, it emphasises a continued parent-child relationship, a perpetual dependency, not an attempt to create local autonomy. They should not be holding them up as special treats to win support for an elected mayor, which I think the population in this area doesn't want. A large amount of the contents of a pork barrel are time-limited. They are streams of money that will end, or they are decisions that will either be at some point implemented or they won't. This sadly includes our housing offer. But the thing demanded from us is forever. There is no expiry date for a combined authority and for an elected mayor. And that doesn't command a price tag, but it means that things that do command a price tag in the future, or other decisions that have an impact on this city, are potentially subject to a governance that on any historical basis is likely to leave the city isolated when it comes to issues decided on the basis of values and priorities, the points that Councillor Guerin was steering towards in his questions earlier. And a governance that will lock out deliberative decision-making from the cut and thrust that comes from a spread of views and a distinction between executive and non-executive responsibility. The sort of process that we're embarking on here. And a form of governance that obscures accountability by introducing an extra layer of government and overlaying it on an already dysfunctional structure that we suffer from but doesn't get eliminated. And it's a governance also that prevents the emergence of other groupings of councils over more strategic areas like Greater Cambridge, a true example of a functional economic market area, and incidentally what was promised to us in the city deal as a demonstration of the government's authenticity, something that is implicitly reneged on by the offer of this deal in front of us today. And if there's the greatest travesty of all of the papers we have in front of us is this governance review, which is the finest example I ever saw of decision-based evidence making. Yes. Starting with what you want and groping around for the evidence to prove it. It's a travesty of what our officers should have been doing, and I think it's very regrettable that it's presented to us for support today. Mr. Mayor, my colleagues don't agree with this governance, which we see as often offering little or no advantages to this city or its council, and plenty of disadvantages. And I think it's a democratic offence everywhere. I'm moving 2 amendments to reflect other aspects of our views. The first seeks to put the housing benefits in the deal into a fuller context. It's not to say that what the deal offers in this respect aren't positive, but it is to remind us to keep things into proportion. This deal doesn't get us where we need to be, and work needs to continue to get us there. It's a question of not losing our compass and recognising that we are not, with this deal, yet arriving at a destination we should feel relaxed about. And the second amendment that I'm moving recognises the inherent accountability deficit that will come with the proposed governance arrangements. It seeks to address the way this council responds to this if the deal happens. We can't change the features of the governance in this deal by votes in the council today, but we can obviously oppose or vote against the deal. But we can make sure that the person who participates in the combined authority, the legal or a substitute, from here is subject to accountability to us. And I think that we're looking here at a continuation of a trend, which correctly remarked upon is an extension of what we see with the city deal. Increasingly important powers are exercised from this council by 1 member or 2 members going off and participating in votes elsewhere, and we need to do something about that deficit inside this council. These are both constructive propositions for the eventuality that this devolution deal happens, and I hope council will agree with them, so that we don't either rest in our commitment to secure the eventual deal for housing that the area really needs, and we set our own democratic standard for that part of this governance that is genuinely within our own control.
Thank you, Councillor Bick. Can I have a seconder for the amendments? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first thing I'd like to say is that I find the amendments entirely acceptable, and I don't propose to make a further comment on them other than that I shall support. The second thing is that hanging over the discussion we're having this evening are all of the uncertainties which have been created as a result of the referendum on Thursday of last week. And one of the things which worries me very, very much is that in the same way that companies up and down the country are now reconsidering their investment plans, so it may occur to whatever government is appointed in October to consider that they should freeze the investment plans of a previous government, especially as that government's main proponent of the devolution deal, George Osborne, and George Osborne, I believe, is toast. Cambridge is needed more than ever in this post-Brexit world. The whole justification for the, insofar as there was any justification for leaving Europe, was that somehow there would be a renaissance in this country, that we would find a new entrepreneurial spirit, that we would make a go of it, that we would show the world. We would go, you know, like Captain Cook going off into the distance in his expeditions around the world and so on. We were going to conquer New Market, all of that stuff. Well, we need Cambridge at the very centre of this. So I would also like, if I may, to pay a special tribute to Lewis Herbert, because of the way that he has handled these negotiations. And I don't think it has been it's any secret that Councillor Herbert has not always found it easy to convince his own group of the merits of the case of devolution. And much of the opposition from within that group has been motivated more than anything by the desire to pin down the question of Cambridge affordable housing and how this deal is going to make a significant impact on it. So I congratulate both the leader and the Labour group for the fact that they have held out for these demands and that they have very, very considerably influenced the quality of the deal which is before us. As for the deal, let's remember it is a deal. It's a compromise. It's an agreement hammered out between two bodies that in many ways have different perspectives and different interests. We, the government, and we, the local authority, are united, I'm sure, in wanting Cambridge to succeed, to continue to succeed in the way that it has. We're not opposed in this respect. And the two impedimenta to this development of the city is, one, the transport chaos, and two, the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis. These are the two restraints, constraints upon the further economic development of our city. And the deal before us offers very considerable help with both of those. £70 million for housing in this city. It's almost unbelievable as an offer. £100 million for housing in South Cambs and elsewhere in the county. The fact that we have been able to persuade the government to seriously consider, and I hope accept, that we're going to go forward with an authority comprising simply the county and Peterborough rather than the whole of the East Anglian region. Another very considerable concession won from government. 600 million over 30 years for transport infrastructure, and that 600 million can be used as leverage to release private and other sources of funding. The figures are unimaginably large, and everyone in the city agrees that if we are to make any progress, we really have got to have schemes sufficient to deal with congestion and to deal with the fact that people cannot afford, but so particularly people who serve this city cannot afford to live within it. So, or close to it, or accessibly to the city. We're also going to get something also unimaginable, greater control over our bus services. A local authority, once again, having an effective say in bus service. I would argue that one of the ways in which the governance problems, to which Councillor Bick has referred, is that we should seriously consider merging the city deal and the new combined authority. I don't see why they should continue to remain as separate bodies, and I think it wouldn't be difficult to bring them together, to bring their funding together. Another thing I hope for very much is that this city and the greater Cambridge area, including, in other words, South Cambridge, that we will come up with a single mayoral candidate for the city. If we go in for party politics big time over this mayoral thing, then we know who's going to